This is incredible. My host has a motorbike that I'm able to borrow, and so now I have this. This is cool. I'll take you on a ride. The first time I got a vehicle was with 16. It was a small 50cc scooter in Berlin, and it enabled me so much freedom of movement. And even though Berlin is a beautifully connected city and easy to get around with public transport, having a small vehicle meant I could go into all the in-between places that typically, well, I just couldn't get to. At the same time, it allowed me just a feeling of I'm actually able to go everywhere and anywhere at any time that I desire. This is such a beautiful place. This is the first top of the mountain, and I'm going to continue walking this way, and we'll be grabbing the bike later. But I want to show you, right now, here we can see Lake Arenal, and really far in the distance there is the volcano called Arenal as well. And what's interesting is this whole area, there's a lot of wind that kind of runs down the lake, and there's a bunch of windmills that they've got set up, which is super awesome for a country that is also wanting to become, well, self-sustainable with their energy usage. And what's also really fascinating in the context of free movement is movement has so much to do with time, in that it's not so much about the freedom of movement, but it's the freedom of time, how quickly we can arrive in different places that we initially or otherwise would take a long time to get to. And there's an interesting connection with movement or space and time, that when society started developing technologies that reduce distance, we also were able to reduce time dramatically. And so the size, let's say, of the planet actually became much smaller. And with the introduction of the internet, this was even more so. So it's really cool that I'm finding myself in this quite contained space, as it's allowing me to illustrate maybe another point that I wanted to make. The digital developing out of our technology has given us not just a freedom in movement and information, but also in time. And in the future, time is going to be more and more a scarce, or rather valuable, resource compared to space. Because when we bridge the spatial distances of things, and it's not a problem anymore to get very quickly from one place to another, the next constraint is time. Alexander Bard talks about this in a very recent post in an intro to explaining digital nomadism, in that the digital has enabled a freedom of movement and freedom of doing business and life that now is only constrained by time rather than space. Okay, so a little bit more intimate here. And to continue talking a little bit about this context of time, and so this context of time is really one that's going to explore different realms of being and experience. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the context of time and space shifting in the world. The beautiful thing about time becoming an essence of living is that we're starting to really focus on the experience of life and not just on the doing of life. We don't just start to do the things in the world, the material things, but we can actually also be with the non-material things, the experience of life. Now, I'm not ignorant to the reality of space and geography determining my experience in this moment, and so of course there's an interaction between the two, and yet there's a shift or a movement from one to the other slowly. Not just is there focus on the doing, and not just is there focus on the being, but rather there's an invitation to step into the becoming, the movement, the oscillation between both of them. And in this integration of being and doing, resulting in becoming, or rather emerging into becoming, we can start to feel the freedom of life, because life is constantly calling us into oscillating. Balance is a concept that isn't static. Balance is a concept that is dynamic. And so this mode of becoming is one that is exactly in this dynamic, oscillating state. One that respects the boundaries and the structures, the matter of things, but also the movement of things. It cannot be locked down. It's not like a methodology or a script that we run from the top to the bottom. It's also something you cannot directly teach, let's say, because becoming is a moving, it's an arriving. And the beautiful thing is, as we're discovering in cognitive sciences, especially with the work of John Vervaeke, is that we are constantly in a mode of seeing and arriving and then letting out and oscillating out to the environment, which then gives us again a reflection to look back inwards that then can go back outwards. He calls this relevance realization. It's funny coming to this little river here, because becoming is a mode of flowing. Just as the water needs some sort of catchment to be able to be orientated somewhere, becoming needs that as well. If the being is the flow of life, the doing is the structure of life. It's what enables the beingness to express itself. And of course they are in relationship, because the flow is also creating the pathway through which it wants to move. The curious thing about becoming is that it's an ever-present mode we are in, while at the same time being one that we tend to overlook or rather work against. As humans, we have a tendency to want to do the things, to lock down whatever we need to lock down, to really make sure that it stays stable. And it's actually a really weird and funny thing that at least our society has this urge to do so, because in the past many societies used to live with the movement of the world, with the cycles that keep shifting and everything that surrounds the movement of being alive. Cities have the tendency to get rid of all of the things that are inconsistent. It creates a layer on top of the world that kind of plays on being stable. And so we create infrastructures that typically wouldn't need to be created if we were living with the movement, with the flow, the becoming of life. And so society would be imbued with a new sense of aliveness if it was to allow itself to find itself in the mode of becoming. Becoming always holds a bit of a risk, because in becoming you are actually allowing yourself to become unhinged, to become destable, to leave the safety of position. And so we progress into the unknown. And in this process, we actually become who we already are. Another beautiful thing about the mode of becoming is that it's one of surprises. It's one of allowing life to also show itself to oneself. It's one where we're able to stay curious and connected to what happens around us. The mode of becoming allows the movement of oneself with life. As I say that, I nearly slip and my foot takes its own movement with the slipperiness of the mud here. And just in that way, we might step on something slippery, we might step on something unexpected and make a movement to adjust to it. And so why am I speaking about becoming? And maybe just to tie this together, how did we get from space, time, but before that even, just the freedom of movement? Well, I think it's quite obvious by now that I see life as a oscillation, as a dance between the doing and the being. And in this mode of becoming, it's that we find freedom. It's that we find free movement and also ease of movement, because we expect and understand there to be an oscillation between what we be, who we be, and what we do. What's also just become very obvious to me is that what I'm speaking about intellectually might be somewhat nonsensical or obvious, we could even say. But it's intentionally so. It is not a thing that the mind can fully grasp, because it is a thing that has to do with the heart. The allowing of life, the allowing in principle, is one of the heart. To love means to allow. And so there's also an oscillation between the mind and the heart. There's a becoming in the relationship between these two energy centers. And so if this is confusing, or if it doesn't make any sense, that's quite okay. And the invitation is not to need to understand it or even to take anything from it, but rather to allow yourself to feel into